But I think we always try to think beyond that. How do we reinvent ourselves? How do we do board form concrete in a different way next time? How do we export this California philosophy to Dubai? How do we reinvent what it means to live in a house, but now you live on a hill? There's all these different things that I think we present to ourselves as challenges that make every project new and unique.
Welcome to Titans of Trade. I'm your host, Costa, and today we welcome a notable architect who's not only an architect, but a partner at design agency KAA Design Group in California. Welcome, Duan Tran.
Hi, thank you, Constance.
And it's funny because I was thinking of introducing you because you are an architect, and I was like, oh, maybe a California contemporary architect. But increasingly, and kind of your origins are not just like a California contemporary guy in terms of architecture.
Right. Yeah, no, I started my career actually in the Midwest. I'm a Midwestern boy that transplanted to Los Angeles 25, 30 years ago. Can't believe I'm saying that, but I guess that's true. So, but yeah, it's funny for a lot of different reasons. I came out here partly, first of all, just for school. I went to USC for graduate school. And spent a couple of years there. And my intention at that point in time was to do a couple of years on the West Coast and kind of absorb and take in the California lifestyle. And obviously the architecture and design industry is so strong here, but then probably go back to the Midwest or the East Coast where most of my family and friends are. But, like so many people, best of intentions, and things changed. And I ended up in a wonderful firm that I'm still at, obviously, as a partner now at KAA Design. And built up a wonderful relationship with Grant Kirkpatrick, who's the founding partner. And over the years, I've just kind of really found myself invested in what we do and growing with the firm, and then really believing in, the kind of work that we're doing, especially in our community and everything. So it's been a joy and actually kind of giving me a little bit of a second life here, thinking now that I'm actually probably more Californian than not, than to be able to kind of operate as an architect, especially in this sphere. So
in many ways, you guys are known as like very high-end California, but increasingly you guys are moving abroad, Dubai, Costa Rica. You're doing work in other like climates and territories, which is significant given how much emphasis it's really the focus. The land is is the star of the design in many ways. What you guys are doing, increasingly, it's not a California firm.
Well, it is, and it isn't. And it's something that, we've talked about at the highest levels, because in a way we never aspired to do work outside of California, because like you mentioned, we were very comfortable as a Southern California firm. There's so many great opportunities here. The climate is so conducive to the kind of work that we do, especially on our modern end. But what's been interesting over the last few years, and I would say the last 4 or 5 years in particular, is that there's a certain notion, and we've been able to understand this, even especially after we put our most recent book called California Contemporary, is that there's so many parts of the world, or even nationally, where people think of California as an adjective. That's how they describe things. I want a Californian da-da-da-da-da. And when we started to dig further into it, it transcended the fact that it had to be Los Angeles based or San Francisco, but there were certain themes and design values that people, even outside of Southern California, were appreciating. Notions of warm modernism, notions about lifestyle-driven design, notions of just contextual materials and a connection to nature. And those kind of things which we've been able to adopt and kind of use as our DNA as kind of Californian architects, it's been fun to be able to explore as people from Dubai, folks in Washington, D.C., places in Costa Rica, where our clients have come to us and have asked us to interpret that California lifestyle in these different climates. So in particular here, this project that you brought up, which is really kind of a special one for us, that we took on about 3 or 4 years ago. And actually they're just starting to get construction. So it's going to be interesting to see how this thing works out. But this is a project in Dubai. It's a significant villa with exhaustive landscape site amenities. And for this particular client, they were wanting somebody with a California or international flavor. I mean, there's definitely an aesthetic that currently exists in Dubai that's not very westernized. There's a lot of traditional values and an architectural vernacular that exists. And so what they were looking for was somebody who was able to promote a lot of these Western values about use of material. How do we open up the house? How do we explore and push out the massing of the house, cantilever eaves, things of like these kind of elements that really push the ideas of California optimism. And so for this particular client, thankfully they had a certain wherewithal to be able to explore that and to tap onto us. But this was a great example about how we were able to interpret those California elements into what is a very different environment culturally as well as climatically. And we'll see how it works out. But we're very excited, and the clients are very pleased, and I think very much looking forward to seeing this project complete in the next couple of years.
Right. It's quite dramatic and grand, yet it's very much a KAA house. And those watching on YouTube, of course, can see this. And one of the things I've always noticed about you is that I could mention, 2201 The Strand, or, just some address, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Right.
You're an architect, but I have admired that you run a very successful, I could say famous firm. When I have spoken with you, you're always very calm and you're very focused. So for people that the thought of doing both of those worlds, you plan the initiatives of your firm, you have a lot to do with KAA Design Group as an organization, how that organization is going to be structured, how it's running on a day-to-day basis and in the future. So how do you parse those in your mind? Like, do you keep them separate? Like, how do you do this wide variety of things every day?
Listen, it's such a great question. And I mean, as you know, it's hard to be successful in this business for the longevity of it. And oftentimes, because most architects or designers, it's the whole left-right brain thing, right? Either you're creatively inclined or you just have a more business-like sense. And it's pretty rare that you get to put that together. But I think that's kind of what's unique about us. I would say between my partners, Grant, Eric, and I, is that, I think the way that we see it, I mean, there's no doubt, I think our heart of hearts, we're all designers. We're all very creative. But we've never seen the business part of the firm as a means to an end, or it's just something to be done. And I do think that there are a lot of architecture design firms that see that as a means to an end. There's a complete set of people that work on that work on the business aspects, and then there's the creative. But we kind of taken a much more progressive approach about it, is to think about how do we actually design the firm. And, for us, there's just a cultural thread about pushing ingenuity, being creative about not only about how we design, but how do we structure our organization in terms of the fees, who do we hire? It's almost like another design project, right? Versus a business decision per se. And so, I can't say that it's been perfect. There's a lot of risk versus reward versus that. But for a firm like ours that's been able to be able to kind of tap on and really push on different ideas and think about designing certain aspects of our firm to really be conducive to allow us to do better design work has been monumental. And we've seen the traction of that over the last 10 or so years. And so in particular, for example, when we hire somebody, there's kind of an initial idea, well, of course, we want to hire a well-rounded architect, somebody that does a little bit of everything very well. And it's generally a very safe approach, right? We all want somebody that's well-rounded, that doesn't have, say, a blind spot. But for us, there's times, and we've been, exposed to some really interesting young architects. Either they're amazing designers, either they have amazing rendering skills, or they're visionaries, or they're amazing communicators. They have almost a certain superpower. And what we do, those are the people that we're really interested in hiring, right? It's about how do we bring people in that have a certain amount of elitism or exceptionalism in terms of the skill set, and how do we nurture that? And then be able to put that together with other people with elite skills. And so it's caused us to develop our team in a way where we have some very focused specialty skills, people that bring elite talents to our design process that will ultimately render projects like Dubai. And we're only able to get there because we're able to put that together with the team that we have. And that's a very different result than if we hired somebody that, they might be great. They might be a great three-dimensional visualization expert, but they're missing this component of it. And so all of a sudden, that person might not be as attractive because they're not as well-rounded. Well, for us, it's very exciting for us to find somebody who has an exceptional skill and then figured out within our team environment about how to push that and design that professional development career path with them. So that's kind of one example about how we approach things. It's definitely not to separate the two, but we do see running the business as a design project in many ways. So
that's a really great approach, and it's probably one that is really mindful of the resources of how much mental energy can be expanded when you separate or compartmentalize tasks. Like if you have to say, okay, I've been working on these plans, and now I have to go think about, some internal issue or okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I like your idea of assembling kind of like a superhero team, because that's consistent with the type of work that KAA produces, which is very kind of like heroic looking, not just visually, but also with the materials. Like I wrote about a strand home, and I cannot remember the address of it, but it's like the board form concrete, because the real estate agent I was talking to was talking at length about the board form, and he in fact has a KAA Design home. This and was talking about this material. And could you tell us what that is? Like, could you define this one? It's a very unique, it's kind of unique to you guys.
Absolutely. So the use of board form concrete has actually become one of those go-to materials for us. And we love it for a lot of different reasons. I mean, one, there's a structural integrity to it. So most of the homes, especially nowadays, in order for them to pass engineering requirements, there's a certain level of requirement that the city requires for those things. And so oftentimes, because of the heroic nature, as you say, of our homes, where they're large expanses of glass and less walls, those walls have to be designed in a way where they're really structurally strong. And so concrete ends up being kind of a go-to for us. So then with that, most of the architects, somebody might go, well, concrete's an ugly material. Who wants to see it? Let's cover it up. Let's paint it. Let's plaster it over. But we've taken a different approach, which is let's celebrate it. Let's honor the fact that it's a concrete, beautiful wall. And maybe there's a way to play with the board forms, which is how they actually create the pour of that. So they basically use wood boards, pour concrete into it, and they pull off the wood boards. And that's what gives the natural graining effect. And there's a lot of different versions of that. And, you can play with vertical, horizontal, random, in and out. There's a bunch of different ways that different architects play with it. But what it's done is it's an opportunity for us to embrace the integrity of the use of the material for what it is, but also make it beautiful, right? Not make it an ugly, raw concrete wall, but bring some natural, organic qualities to it, where people are now actually seeking that out. They actually want board formed concrete walls. They see that as a beautiful element, even though on the surface, people might go, wow, why would you want an exposed concrete wall in your living room? Doesn't that feel cold and, unapproachable? So for this particular project, as you mentioned on the Strand, that was definitely the case in point. The clients really gravitated to it. But, speaking about just, team members, so on that particular project, we had a team member that had extraordinary experience doing board form concrete because they had spent some time working with a general contractor a few years in a prior life before coming to KAA. So we were really able to explore and push the ins and outs about how to really exploit that as a design material versus just kind of mail it in and just say it's a structural wall. And so we would have probably never gotten there had we not had that team member on that project to bring that certain level of expertise and passion to the effort. And so that's just one quick example about being able to tap into people's skill sets and expertise and personal passions.
Yeah, I love that. And for this home, I recall that the homeowner or the client had said, and this is through the agent, said something to the effect of, because it was going to be a family home, a beach home, like it was going to be used and abused every day. And she had said something to the effect of, if a herd of elephants came through here, I would want it to look just as good. And the interesting thing about this home is that I remember it was completed, and I again don't, it had been completed a while back, yet it looked like brand new, like out of the box. So again, to what you're saying with this particular material. And I love this idea too of where you're going to exploit this this material that some might hide away. And it reminds me of like a Frank Lloyd Wright or a Neutra or even like Rourke from The Fountainhead of like, it like a building must be like a man. Like you can't be ashamed and hide things. Do you know what I mean? Like you're putting it out there, right? And exploring and positively exploiting this material that some might want to tuck behind some kind of other material. So
Yeah.
that goes,
Yeah.
I think.
And it's exactly, yeah, and it's exactly that point. I mean, we're fundamentally, we generally believe in the integrity and the authenticity of the use of materials. And so
Right.
it's pretty rare that we'll do something that's, say, manufactured or fake. A
Uh-huh.
client would need to push us to that another arena. There would need to be some, overwhelming reason to do that. And so,
Right.
even at times where, again, a Strand beach home, this one in particular that you're talking about, has wood siding on it. And everybody
And
on
it,
the Strand will say, why are you using wood siding? That's not going to last
right.
more than a year or two. Well, but
Right.
we, as well as the client, believe in the authenticity of, listen, if we're going to use wood, it should be real wood. And we just really embrace and know that we're just going to have to upkeep it every year or two. It needs to be refinished. It's like keeping your car, getting your oil changed. It's just, there's certain
Right.
things that you need to do to maintain it. But for them, that was important to live in a piece of architecture that was authentic versus something that was, say, fake or manufactured. And, I think that's one of the elements that I think we take a lot of pride in, is knowing that there's a certain level of craft and authenticity and integrity that comes with our work that's maybe less manufactured at times. So
Right. Right. Now, to your superpowers, one of the things I noticed about you is you are like Midwest, East Coast. I think you worked in
yeah,
DC, and you also have
right.
like a from USC. You have a certificate in like historical preservation. Is that accurate? Is that what it
Right.
is? Right, right,
That
right.
is, yeah, yeah.
Right, right. So that's interesting. May I ask some of your kind of first architectural loves? Like I always loved the Breakers. You know what I mean? Up in
Yeah,
Rhode
right.
Island, Newport. There's a certain colonial architecture, that type of a thing. And since you have that
Yeah,
background in historic works, I'm curious.
right. Yeah, it's interesting. So it's something that I fell into during my year or two when I was in Washington D.C. Prior to moving
Right.
out to Los Angeles, and I've always appreciated history, just as a side note. But when you're
Mm-hmm.
immersed in an environment, a community like Washington D.C., where I mean,
Right.
literally every other building you walk into, George Washington slept here, or Abraham Lincoln had a drink here, you start to appreciate the value of
How did?
that. And,
Right.
there's things obviously like Mount Vernon and Monticello when you get to experience these things and you realize that, I'm fortunate to be able to, and so many other people of our generation are able to visit it. But if somebody didn't upkeep these things and or there weren't structural rules and guidelines on behalf of the government to protect these buildings, this history would be lost, and that would be a failure. And so I really
Mm-hmm.
appreciate it, and began to develop the sensitivity to that. And so that became one of my course curriculums when I went to USC, was to essentially get a minor. They called it a certificate, but a minor in historic preservation as part of my architectural master's degree. And for me, that was really fun to explore, because very different than the East Coast. When somebody thinks of something historic in Los Angeles, it's 40 years old. It's not 200 years old, right? And
Right,
but what that
right.
did was it really caused me to take a look at what historic meant in Los Angeles, which was essentially to lead to a lot of the modern case study houses of Neutra and Schindler and
The
the mid 50s, mid 60s modernism, which is historic for Los Angeles. And it
yes.
gave me a new love and appreciation for West Coast modernism, which is kind of where I think when I look back and I go, geez, what's anchoring me as an architect today, as a warm, modern, contemporary architect, it's really kind of that fundamental appreciation for what happened 50, 60 years ago, and
Hmm.
understanding and really valuing the wonderful architects and their design points of view and the aesthetics that came out of that.
Yeah.
So historical preservation, in a way, is kind of where I came from, but now taken in a different environment of Southern California, being able to kind of push that forward in a much more current world. So
Yeah, especially I think with the materials like Dion Neutra, we had the
right,
opportunity prior to his passing. He lived in one of his father's original
fine,
designs. I think it was called the Reunion Home in Silver Lake. So we got to do some filming there, and it was very, really wonderful. And one of the things to even see like the sliding glass, it was the father had
right,
created this for the family to kind of come together and hang out. And really, Dion had kept it very authentic. It was still very user friendly, many decades later. But I do think it's wonderful to see all the innovations, particularly in, like, for instance, glass. that makes
Right.
the dream of what a Neutra had, or the people coming out of the Bauhaus, like
Right.
1920, that they're able to realize the philosophical visions. There's just a lot happening technologically. And I'm curious if there's anything kind of floating your boat lately that's just happening on the
Oh man.
tech front or materials or.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, there's so much, and it's crazy to think. It does feel like there's this digital renaissance right now. I mean, we
God,
always know that things are escalating. There's new things and gadgets that are coming out, but I would say the last year or two, not only within our design industry but worldwide, but just the impact that AI has. I mean, I think everybody at this
oh,
point in time knows what ChatGPT is and things of that
yeah.
level. But for us and how it applies to our technology and kind of how our design process worked is it's allowed us to standardize and modernize a handful of different parts about what we used to do by hand and or need to our process to come out of the box thinking about different creative ideas. There's shortcuts to be able to spur new ideas that we may not have thought about.
Hmm.
Artificial intelligence is helping with that, just kind of be able to, like it's almost like using Google and just typing in, show me something heroic and cantilevering over an ocean, and they'll spit out 50 different images. And in a way, they're almost like inspirational. It's like Pinterest, right? It's just a
Right.
different way of using it, but it's pushing us and allowing us to tap into resources and new ideas that we otherwise, it would just take us a little longer to get to. So I
Oh,
think things like that are really starting to further promote new ideas in
hmm.
design as a whole. But within architecture, I think you're going to see residences or buildings starting to look very different. Gone are the four
Really?
walls of the flat roof. I think you're seeing things that are much more organic now, things that feel like they blend into the environment. There's just a lot of different ideas right now that are permeating, primarily because we're not so much in our head anymore and stuck with what we know as historical precedents, that there's computers and artificial intelligence right now that are kind of pushing the envelope about what we can now conceive as what a new building looks like. So like, for example, if we were to do another project in Dubai, it would be interesting to, figure out through AI, well, what is a modern, warm, contemporary residence looks like in Dubai? And I'm sure it would spit out something fantastical, right? Just an image, an inspirational image, an artist rendering. And then it's just enough to be able to spark something that goes, I never thought about doing a swoopy roof, but that works because they're playing off of the sand dunes. I don't know, whereas we might be stuck with some other kind of ideas that we've just, always had in our mind. So I think
Right.
technology in general is going to be this incredible thing that continues to push, not only our industry and profession moving forward, but the world. There's no doubt it's
Right.
making an impact already. So
Well, so much of what KAA does is, again, considering the landscape, the climate, the outdoors. That's
right.
like a starry role. And so I have a couple Costa Rica images, but you can also go to KAA Design, your website as well, which you guys do a great job of having that on there. So the idea of having kind of an island residence, and I think in this case, you guys did such a great job of that. I know it's that word of seamlessness, but of
Right.
like, again, just even making the outside, not just having it be invisible, but making it grander in a sense. Like being able to
Right.
appreciate the virtues of the outdoors while you're inside
Yeah.
in a way that you wouldn't even if you were sitting on the beach.
Right. Yeah. And in that project in particular, the Costa Rica project you mentioned. So that project was really fun because, again, I mean, it's not so different from, say, Southern California, because in a way, the climate, the terrain, there's things that I
Mhm.
think they're similar, but it does take a little bit of a different approach. And so for that particular project, you'll see through maybe a handful of renderings and images that you
Yeah.
have is that the house aesthetically looks like a Los Angeles home. It has some very modern lines, some of the detailing, the form is it's not unfamiliar to what we would have seen. But what's really different and fun for us was that house just sits on a very severe terrain with very vertical trees that pop up into it. And so, one opportunity would have been, let's just kind of sit bare ourselves into the terrain and then you're just looking out onto this beautiful vista. But our clients wanted to be a little more adventurous and really push the idea of having these massing volumes, the living room, the bedroom,
Yeah.
cantilever out into the tree
Yes.
canopies. And so it creates this very dynamic structure that one acknowledges that we're on a sloping hillside, but also has a little fun and levity. It says, hey, we want to push these parts of the building out into that tree canopy over there. And so it takes a little bit of a different mindset for somebody to go, that's kind of cool and fun to be able to push something out versus, let's kind of stay back, stay conservative, and let's just kind of take advantage of this wonderful view. So that project is all about creating this dynamic element and form and connection to the site based on how we're reaching out, cantilevering, but also kind of playing into the hillside and the terrain that kind of rolls away from you. So,
right. Are you surprised that architecture has held you for this long? Like, whenever you speak about it, you're always very, you seem to enjoy. I mean, you obviously are very good at communicating about architecture and about projects. And are you surprised you've loved it this long? If you do love it, I don't want to assume.
Ooh, great question. You know what? I'm not surprised, and I would say it's just maybe a testament to what I really appreciate about our field is that you do have to stay nimble. You do have to embrace change. And again, it's probably one of the hallmarks of what makes a great firm successful for 5 years. For some reason, they fizzle out for the firms that are longevity firms, right? And you see this with, especially in the creative and design industry, some people get very fixated on a certain style and they just can't move beyond that. And essentially that style is not in vogue anymore. People are not interested in that fashion, right? And so all of a sudden they just kind of go away. And it's the same thing with architecture. For us, how we've been able to stay nimble is just by staying ahead of the trends, not being trendy. I mean, there's certain things that we're doing that are probably consistent and maybe for somebody that looks at it, it's like kind of trendy. But I think we always try to think beyond that. How do we reinvent ourselves? How do we do board form concrete in a different way next time? Let's not do it the same way we did it before. How do we use a new material? How do we export this California philosophy to Dubai? How do we reinvent what it means to live in a house, but now you live on a hill? There's all these different things that I think we present to ourselves as challenges that make every project new and unique. And I would give a lot of credit to just even a little bit of our business platform in that, as you know, that we do exclusively residential homes, but beyond that, it's only for end users. I would say probably in the 25 years I've been with the firm, we've done one spec home, and that was an exception because we had a client who we were actually doing an end user home for, wanted to kind of do an investment property. But in saying that, the reason why we always work with end users primarily is that there's a certain relationship that you have with a client that if you're doing their home, it's very different than working for somebody who's trying to flip a property or working with a board of directors that's trying to do something for a different financial goal. And because of that and the way that our process works, every one of our projects has our client's DNA in it. I mean, that's why when you look at our work and our portfolio, it's very different. I mean, there's certain common design threads, but aesthetically, they all represent different aspects of our personality, of our clients' personalities. And that's what makes it fun, because you know that every single one of our projects is a prototype. And so, so Grant and I kind of joke a lot about that. It's a tough, crazy way to run a business where you're basically doing a prototype every time you do a project. But it's also what makes it fun. And to your point, it doesn't get boring even after 25 plus years. So.
Right. And I could see how what you said is true. If you look through the portfolio of work, it's very exciting. Like I understand what you're saying, how sometimes there's a designer and the look of the homes, and it's lovely. You know what I mean? They just tend to have a certain look, and then you go, okay, I could see how that's from like the late 90s, or you know what I mean? But your firm, your work is always fresh. And I know there's more to explore there, because some of these things are paradoxes, right? But they work.
No, and I only mention that because of the paradoxes you mentioned, is that, sometimes our clients will come to us because of what they've seen and they would like the same thing-ish, but we're always pushing them to do something different. So that is the paradox. It's kind of, even though this is what people know us for, they still want something new and unique.
It's like a custom dress or a suit. It's like, I saw this dress on this lady and I want one. And you're like, but your coloring is different. And, it's not going to work as much. I could see that. And I'm back to the historic preservation. I had to laugh when you were talking about how you came out to the West Coast and there were things that people were talking about being like antique or, you know what I mean, a historic
Right.
property. Cause I'm from, I grew up and, in a very old house, family house, and around a lot of
Mhm.
antiques and things from like the 17 and 1800s, like family things.
Wow.
And I remember I came
Wow.
out to LA and it was like, oh, it's a antique store. To be like, no, dude, that's like a Starsky and Hutch lunchbox. That's not an antique. Yeah, I'm like, is this like, it's Paul, if it's Paul Revere's time, then that's an antique. So it was just, but it just made me think of it, especially with your background in historic preservation.
Right.
Is there I don't know, a genre architecturally that kind of has interested you that is historic beyond California?
Anyway,
And I know what you're saying about the California
yeah.
historic. It's extraordinary, that aesthetic. But one that you
Right.
just really liked,
Well,
like
I
maybe.
yeah. Well, I mean, listen. I mean, it may be kind of a cop out answer, but I mean, it's hard if you really invest yourself in it that you don't appreciate everything. I mean, what I personally gravitate to is more so the modern
Right.
California historic work, and partly just because I so much identify with the lifestyle component of what those
Mm-hmm.
homes represent, the indoor outdoor flow, the great room idea, living room, kitchen, dining room, all one space. There's certain lifestyle elements and suggestions about how people live that I identify with, which is different than, say, East Coast vernacular, which was much more formal. You have a formal kitchen, you have a formal dining room, and I less identify with that. But I greatly appreciate that, and I still lean on those different ideas and concepts about what it is to do a formal house that has, a home for that the master suite, and why that's not appropriate anymore. It's now the primary
Mm-hmm.
suite. There's certain things
Mm-hmm.
that connote or connotations to that. So, but at the same time, everything through history just kind of weaves through each other. They all inform each other. But I
Right,
would say that
right.
if I had to err to one or the other, I still greatly am inspired by so much of the 1950s, 60s case study homes that, Pierre Iconic did, or the international style, like you mentioned, the
Right.
other stuff there with the Neutras and the Schindlers of the world. I mean, those are the original people that set the foundation for California modernism, and
Mhm.
now other folks, our firm, and so many other people are trying to carry the torch to the next generation. So
Yeah, they're also very rational designs. Like, for instance, I'm thinking of
yeah,
colonial architecture. Like, I understand from growing up in that type of a house that rooms were often small because you needed to heat them, and you needed
right,
to shut them off and
right,
keep them warm because it was freezing. It's New England, and you're freezing all the
uh-huh.
time. So, for
Right,
those reasons, and a lot of times they came from England and kind of distilled those what they knew into buildings and
right,
kept them small. So I know that there's reasons for that as well. It tells a time, it tells the story of a certain time in history, just like California modernism does.
yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
curious.
absolutely.
I know that I could talk to you for a long time, but I've had the opportunity to interview Grant Kirkpatrick as well as you,
Yeah,
and you both are very nice people. I have to say, you're both very pleasant and you have a certain energy about you, which I could see working nicely. You've had this great partnership for a long time. We talked about these elements of
right,
longevity that enable that. And I imagine
right.
the fountainhead of both of the partners, many things come from that. Did you guys just know when you met each other was just like, this is like, did you connect very easily?
Yeah.
Or did it take a
I
while?
would say, I would say on a superficial personality, we're very much alike. Like I could go out and have
Mhm.
a beer with Grant very easily the first week I met him,
Yeah,
and with me, and so I think there's just a comfort factor there.
that's
But
nice.
when I think about the things that have really propelled us to develop our professional relationship and my ultimately becoming partner about 10 years ago is probably two things. One, just really appreciating and valuing each other's differences. And that's
Mm.
saying a lot, right? It's just like with any relationship. At some point in time, either you really appreciate the fact that that person is different and it's going to bring a different point of view, or you see it as an obstacle and burden. Like, well, I don't love that, but I can work around that.
Right,
And
right.
there's a lot of professional relationships where it feels like I'm going to work around that because there's other things. Where Grant and I, and we joke about it all the time. We play off each other's strengths and negatives. My blind spot is his strength, and vice versa. And so we actively seek out each other's input just so that we're looking at something 360, and we really value that and support each other to acknowledge that, which gives us a certain safe space to work from. I'm not afraid to say that I think that design isn't great. Same thing with me, whereas, somebody else might, I wouldn't want to say that. So that's a fundamental thing. And then the other thing I would say over the last couple of years that we've seen that has really helped our relationship is just the notion of the speed of trust. There's so many things that need to happen in the course of the day in terms of either running a business or designing a project where you can't check in with somebody or let them know about every single detail. And the way that our relationship works is that we kind of know where we stand. We trust each other to make the right decision. It's the whole notion of best of intentions. Even though I might disagree, I know that you're coming from the right place. And so it allows us to move very quickly and competently together. And if we do need to remedy something or walk an idea back, then we can do that. But we realize that we're able to move so much more effectively and quickly and with great purpose because we trust each other in our professional setting. And so, acknowledging each other's differences, valuing that, and then just having a fundamental, strong sense of trust, I would say are probably the key things that have at least allowed Grant and I, and actually our other partner, Erica, as well, to be really kind of this strong partnership, and and also probably a litmus as we think about future leaders within our firm, who the future partners are, and ensuring that they also can bring those attributes, trust, valuing differences, and growing our brand that way. So
that's an important point. So there's a real acceptance, because I see the difference where sometimes it's like, oh, well, we'll grin and bear it, or just like, not accepting really, just going, oh, well, I accept they're different and I'll just go along with it. So you really just give up the idea that there will be constant synchronicity at all times, and that difference actually makes for stronger projects. And then
it does because it allows each of us a safe space to challenge each other when we're designing something. I might go, Grant, we've done that same board form wall the last 3 projects. What if you didn't do board form? Whoa, for somebody who might be in a different place, they might go, I didn't ask you, why are you telling, but he's embracing, or he would actually seek out and goes, I don't know, Duan, I've been doing this for the last 2 or 3 projects. Is there another way to do this? Being vulnerable and opening yourself up and seeking that input. And that's what kind of keeps things fresh. It allows each of us to kind of manage our blind spots and our personal preferences and biases. And again, for us, it's been a very healthy dynamic in terms of managing our own individual careers, but also, directing and guiding the firm on a business level as well as on a design philosophy on the show.
Right. And keeping everything continually exciting. It's not the same thing. We're going to have to push each other a little bit. Yeah. But it's done in a way that is done in the spirit of trust. Okay. Very interesting. And that makes sense. So that goes to the idea of the firm being able to do what it has done and continuing in that way.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate. Sorry. And that trust, it plays off to our clients as well, because when our clients see the fact that we have trust, then it develops trust within the client, and then again, we have the ability to do great and wonderful things that may otherwise not have happened. So.
Right, and your clients are one of the star players in this film as well. The film that is every project at KAA, right?
Right.
If there's different stars in it, you very much take into account, you want and need to know everything about their lifestyle, what they do. Like, that's a big part of it. Again, I have probably far too much information about your project, but whenever I've written about them, people they're very excited, and they talk a lot about KAA, obviously.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Exactly. And how very open and inquiring the firm is about wanting to know everything about what you're going to be doing in this house, because that's how you're going to design your house.
Right.
Yeah. Lastly, it always reminds me a little, again, I'm going back to the fountainhead of someone is describing a Rourke home, and they're saying how there's a woman in the house, right? And she is one of the, it's uh, a home that he has designed for a couple. And you could see how he even designed it for her hair coloring and her size and how she was going to move within the house, and how the light was going to hit her and make her look, she's already very beautiful. And, it talks about, so she would look even more beautiful. It was such an intimate design. So, anyway.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. And that's where it gets fun. I think, for what we do, you have to enjoy the people part of it. I was just thinking about that a couple of days ago when we have an amazing client where, even if we weren't doing a project for them, they're just interesting people, and so sometimes selfishly, the opportunity to design a house is just an opportunity to really get to know somebody and understand how they live and what makes them tick. And, oh, by the way, it renders itself out into their home. It's literally a physical manifestation of their lifestyle and their personality. And that's why we say so much of it is in their DNA. And I love that. It's probably the biggest reason when I get asked, why do you do homes versus other buildings? And it's just because of the client aspect of it. Because I wouldn't get the same level of enjoyment or personal investment working for a board of directors or somebody who, again, is doing it for financial reasons. I need to open this store by January, regardless of whatever it is. Those are different goals and they're noble, but I enjoy the human element of it and being able to work with a client and ultimately get them something that, they're very excited and happy about. So.
Right. And that feeling, I imagine that you have well honed by this point where you just, that feeling you'll know where you're like, that's it.
Right.
Does that happen internally? Is that an internal experience?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, it does. And for sure, there's those little moments. They're very fleeting. They come and go very quickly. But when you get a client to understand, or one of the most rewarding times for me is to be able to walk through a project at the end or near completion, and they go, I get it. I didn't understand why you wanted to do a corner window system, but now that I stand here, I get it. For them to acknowledge and recognize that and sometimes get emotional about it, it's a really powerful thing, because you realize that, they would have never gone there without you, but we were able to work and maybe challenge some assumptions. And again, their mindset and everything's elevated. So that's when you really feel like you've made an impact in their lives. So
a home like this is a triumph in someone's life. They typically embark on that, not just when they have the means, but when they're very happy, satisfied,
right.
Some variant of that.
Yeah.
It's a gift you give yourself. Well, Duan, thank you so much. It's always very interesting speaking to you, and I thank you for so much that you've offered out. I know you do what you do very well, and it's nice to get a peek inside the old cerebellum. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Constance.